Hello, hi, and welcome to the Tax Files. I'm Ali Kazmi, and I'm delighted to be joined today by my co-host, Ektaa Kumar. Hello, Ektaa.
Ali, hi. Welcome again to the Tax Files, a monthly audio podcast where, alongside an esteemed guest, we will be discussing the most pertinent topics for tax and accounting professionals, while also getting to know some key members of the tax industry a little bit better. Ali, how have you been?
I'm really good. I was in Oman last week, 48 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
Uh, but I'm back in the gym now and paying for my overindulgence.
Hey, it's a holiday. You're allowed to overindulge.
That's what my colleagues keep saying, but it actually was work, honestly.
Haha, likely story, Ali. I've heard that before.
So tell me, Ektaa, what about yourself? How have you been keeping?
I've been good. My God, I can't believe we're hurtling towards sort of the mid-year already. But the thing that I'm most excited about most recently, I went to go see the new Top Gun. Have you seen it yet?
No, but I think I've got the same skin advisor as the lead actor.
If you do, I'm gonna have to wrestle you for your skin doctor's details. My God, the man hasn't aged, literally. He looks exactly the same in the 1986 Top Gun that he does in the 2022. What is his secret, Ali?
Yep, that's the secret of life, isn't it? That we're all
Someone's got the
looking for.
fountain of exactly. Someone's
And
got the
that's it,
fountain of
fountain
youth
of
in the
youth.
back garden.
Exactly,
Yeah, God,
exactly.
sign me up to whatever he's having. Well, look, today is the third episode of the Tax Files, where we are joined by Malcolm Richardson, who is the global head of tax at FTSE 100 listed investment manager at M&G. What can I say about Malcolm? The chairman of the City Fund Managers, an active member of the Investment Association Tax Committee, and a prominent speaker at a plethora of industry events. In my eyes, a true industry leader in his own right.
Indeed. We will shortly begin by asking Malcolm, uh, may I add, amongst all the illustrious sort of accolades, that he's a good friend of mine as well, and of yours, Ekta, I believe. So that's always a good one. We'll be asking Malcolm about his career journey. We will discuss a variety of matters, including the skills and, dare I say, the temperament required to run an in-house tax function, uh, some recent tax developments, and also the changing workplace. So, last but not least, we will be taking Malcolm through the rapid fire round at the end, where we get to know him a bit better.
Exactly. Well, look, it gives me great amount of pleasure to introduce Malcolm Richardson. Malcolm, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. How's your week been so far?
Thank you, Ekka, and thank you for having me. Yes, my week so far has been very good. It's good to be back in the office, and I'm noticing a big change in more and more people coming back. And I must admit, I, for one, have struggled with COVID and lockdown and working from home. So actually, it's good to be back, and it's good to be talking to yourself and Ali today.
Malcolm, always a pleasure. And I'll kick off by asking you, you've enjoyed an illustrious career at the city. Perhaps you can share with our listeners the key momentous career defining moments in your tax journey that have brought you to where you are today.
It's very kind of you to say, Ali, about my career. Uh, yes, I suppose I took a slightly different route to becoming head of tax of a FTSE 100 company, in that I left school with A levels, didn't go to university, went and joined a firm of chartered accountants, a very small firm of chartered accountants, and actually doing my exams, I really found that I enjoyed the tax bit more than the other part. Certainly, anyone who's done auditing will probably say that that can be quite painful at times. So I got into tax at quite an early age, and I joined M&G back in 1987, which feels like a long time ago now. And I was quite lucky, I believe, because I joined what is a very good company, and a company that has always treated people with respect, and actually, if you're good enough, you will get on at M&G, and certainly that's certainly what happened with me. So I do think that I joined the right company. And you may say, well, why have you never left that company? Well, it's because I've enjoyed working there, and I've also enjoyed working in the industry. I do believe we are very lucky that we work in an industry with good people. If I look at, my peers, they're all really good people, and people who I've enjoyed working with. So that's been that's a big plus. There's not many people that can say you enjoy going to work. Well, I do, and that's why I still do it.
Mm. Well, I mean, Malcolm, you're not alone. Most people don't, from at least I talk to, intend to get into the tax profession. They're accidental heroes. They fall into it. Most kids, when they're growing up, they will want to be pilots and train drivers and so on. But anyway, here we are. You have been at M&G for a very long time, at a time that we hear a lot about the Great Resignation. You have managed to stay put, and kudos to you. I'm going to sound like a marriage counselor now, but tell me, how do you keep to manage your job engaging and exciting?
I think, to be honest, and this is going to sound, I don't know, a bit blasé, but I think managing a team, and quite a large team, I have quite a large team of people who have stayed with me for a long time. I do think personal skills are so important. And I've always believed that you should treat people how you want to be treated. So I suppose whether it's come to me naturally, I found man management, if you like, want for a better phrase, quite natural to me. I think at school I did a lot of team sports, so I was always a team player. And I just think the work is so interesting. If I look back over my career and what has happened, we've gone almost, dare I say, we've gone a full circle. But certainly if I think back to those, the 90s and early 2000s, the tax world was very different to what it is today, and dealing, dare I say, with regulators, HMRC, was very different to how we deal with regulators today. And I do think you have to move with the times, dare I say. But I think the fact that the work's been interesting, there's never a dull moment, it's certainly helped.
Yeah. Malcolm, you correctly identified there. You have got a team of people that have, followed you through your journey and have been with you for a really long time, which obviously incites a level of loyalty and buying into the business. And I think you've done that so well. You manage one of the biggest teams in the kind of asset management space from a tax perspective. And I think that's testament to kind of your leadership and what you've done over the years. Tell me, what do you look for in terms of the softer skills when you're hiring?
I look, and again, Ali will know this, but a long time, years ago in the tax profession, you would get what I would call tax geeks, people who are, know the legislation inside out, but actually aren't very good at one-to-ones and dealing with people. And you could survive years ago being like that. I do think it's much harder today. So what I look for generally in people is people who are rounded, people who, don't put themselves first, but put the team first. I do think that, what's the saying, the sum is greater than the parts. I do think that's so important. And again, the people who I've employed, most people I've met somewhere in the industry, whether it's, sometimes it may be on a golf course, but I've met people before and then they've come in for an interview and it's like, yes, we know each other. Yes, I know you can do the job. Yes, you're a good person. And that's what I look for. And I've been very lucky that most of the people that I've employed, I've gone from a very small team to a large team. And over that time, that team, the people have stayed with me. And I think it's, as I said earlier, it's how you treat people. I always say you can retain people by paying people lots of money, but realistically, how that's not tenable in the long term. Or you can give them interesting work and give them autonomy. Let them make decisions. And that's something I've always done. I've always delegated. My team would probably say I delegate too well, but I've always delegated, and I've never, very rarely have I overrode someone's decision, because I don't think that's in the best interest, as long as they're factually and technically correct, of course. So yeah, I think it's treat people well, let them empower people is the phrase I'm looking for, I suppose.
It's testament to a true leader, I guess, somebody who can delegate appropriately and kind of obviously know when to step in when they have to. You kind of hit a really interesting point there, Malcolm, around the evolution of the tax professional, from going from, kind of very textbook and very about the technical aspects, to that changing over the years and becoming a function that I guess essentially is a business facing function and needs to be able to have conversations with peers as well as they do C-suite and sort of, the directors of the business. How do you keep up with the evolution? How do you constantly change and challenge yourself in an environment that's changing at the speed of light?
It's a good question. I do think that you have to keep up to date. I do think that's a given. You need to know what is going on, what's coming down the line next. I also think that you need to, enjoy what you're doing. We spend a lot of time at work, and I always feel I know my work colleagues probably better than I know my wife. I'd never tell her that, of course, but that's how sometimes I spend a lot more time with my work colleagues. And I just think you need to make sure that you're constantly, challenging yourself. You're constantly making sure you're up to date. And as I say, it's definitely changed. The whole environment has changed. My job now is as much about reporting to boards, going to, senior execs, board meetings, and giving them the assurance that, there's no skeletons out there. We don't want to be on the front page of a newspaper. We're a listed company. We've got shareholders. And no one is going to thank me if all of a sudden we're in the headlines for doing something we shouldn't be doing. And I think you can soon get in a mess. You have to be very careful. It's certainly changed, as I say, from where we were back in, as I say, the early 2000s.
So on that subject, with the changing landscape of tax and kind of obviously how that's all changed over the course of the last sort of years that you've been with M&G, what for you is one of the major sort of legislation changes that's impacting your day to day at the moment?
I think if I go back, I do think in some of the things that changed, certainly first of all, in the mid-2000s or late 2000s, we had the financial crash. And that suddenly changed the whole tax landscape, because all of a sudden, if you like, tax, front page news was how much tax in the UK is companies like, your Google, Starbucks, these sorts of companies that we all know, everyone knows these companies, Amazon, Facebook, etc., etc. All of a sudden, it was front page news because of the financial crisis. We then had, which I think was very clever by HMRC. HMRC brought in a set of tax rules for large companies called Senior Accounting Officer.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that put an onus on companies to ensure that their controls and processes and systems were fit for purpose. You could no longer say, my tax return is wrong because the accountants gave me the wrong information. That was no longer acceptable. And then, of course, we've had something that came in, which is still with us, which is the whole BEPS process. So the 15 action points, BEPS came in my memory, but 2013.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, whether companies have fully adhered to the BEPS, those 15 proposals or not, it has changed companies' outlook. The other thing that came along all of a sudden was you had tax on the boardroom agenda, you had risk reporting, which, as I say, was a big change. So, how do we cover off tax risk? Has become, and I've spoken at several conferences over the years on tax risk and what we have to do. And, that's really important to boards and to companies. So I do think it's been a combination of HMRC's change in attitude, people's change in attitude around people who are not paying. And there's a big debate around what is the correct amount of tax or what is the fair amount of tax. We would say that we pay the correct amount of tax. Whether that's fair or not is possibly a different question. But we also have to publish a tax strategy so that, whoever would have thought that companies would be publishing how they conduct their tax affairs that's publicly available. You can go onto our website. That's something that I never thought that we would be doing. We've had calls, haven't we, over the last, I think maybe was it David Cameron that suddenly had to publish parts of his tax return. Whoever would have thought that we would have, a tax return is sanctusect. It's an individual's private thing. And yet here we've got people saying you should be publishing your tax return. Now that possibly a step too far.
Yeah.
But we as a large corporate have to publish our tax strategy and have to do things like country by country reporting, which there is a big call and it's already coming for public country by country reporting. So people can see how much tax we are paying and where we are operating.
So, Malcolm, that's really interesting. A quick journey through some of the key developments in the tax integrity agenda. And, sort of like it's a large part of my own practice. But what I thought would be interesting is to hear your view around that, which is with this increased demand on transparency and reporting that goes with it, do you think it's too much reporting? Or you think, reporting, or should I say, is too much regulation? Is it over-regulated? Or you think it's about right? Or, what's your view on that?
Ali, it's a good question. I do think that where we've got to now, whether we like it or not, we have to do it. There is an expectation that we will do this reporting. So whether that's things like we feed in to the FTSE 100 total tax contribution, we feed in how much tax we are paying. You can look, as I say, in our tax strategy, we publish all the different taxes and the amounts of tax we pay. I just think once that's out there, it's very difficult to go back, which again is why, our tax strategy is 11 pages long. And sometimes people say to me, well, shouldn't it be longer? And my retort back is, well, once you put it out there, it's very difficult not to publish at least the same again the next year and the year after. So I do think do I think it's too much or too little? I think it is where it is. We don't have much choice in the matter. I do think that, as I say, the world has moved on. Our relationship, you mentioned transparency. Our relationship with HMRC is very transparent. so much different to how it was, years ago. We were part of Prudential PLC. They were very litigious as an organisation. We've now span off and we're our own listed company. And where we are today is light years from where we were years ago as regards how we deal with HMRC, which personally I think is a good thing. Does it give us any favours? I'm not so sure, if I'm honest, but at least we can pick up the phone. We have a CCM because we're a large taxpayer. If we've got an urgent issue, we can at least pick up the phone, which I do wonder how small and medium-sized companies get on. We do have that one advantage, but we are transparent.
I mean, I think that it's an interesting one because obviously talking to many organizations, it is about your personal brand, what you say about yourself, and the path that you take. One doesn't want to obviously create a rod for one's own back, but I think sometimes having that very open, transparent relationship does help in the long run. The difficulty, as you probably know, is you look around and you may do 11 pages of disclosure, but it's inconsistent across the industry, and the people who basically do the minimum, and perhaps they're not even legally compliant. So it's an interesting one. So we'll be watching that brief. Malcolm, you're obviously have had a really big impact on the asset management industry, and been on various boards and organizations which has debated and entered into discussions with Treasury and other policymakers. I mean, do you think that historically UK has been a benign regime, has provided a benign regime for managers, but not been that successful as a location for fund domicile? And there's been stops and starts. There have been various products, things like pension fund pooling vehicles, which came and went and nobody really took them up. I mean, do you think that's about to change with the qualified asset holding companies?
It's an age-old question, isn't it? Around how do we make ourselves more competitive? Have we got the right regimes in place? I think the UK have been very lucky that asset management companies like to be in the UK, and certainly we've got good schools, it's a good place to live. So I do think from an asset management position, I think we're in a good location. As regards fund location, that's a very, M&G were one of the few houses, weren't we, that were successful. Our motto was manufacture once, distribute many. So we only had one main product, which was a UK product, and we were very successful in distributing that product into Europe, also into Asia, which everyone said we wouldn't be able to do, and we did that. So, but it all comes down to investment performance. I do believe if you've got investment performance, you will be able to, it doesn't matter where that fund is. It's certainly Brexit hasn't helped initially, and we had to set up a range of, Luxembourg funds because of not being able to sell our funds into some European locations post-Brexit. So that has certainly been a challenge to M&G, probably unlike other fund houses. And what Treasury and HMRC are trying to do in making us more competitive with regimes like you say, the asset holding regime, is they should be applauded. My only concern is you can go to Luxembourg and do that. You can go to Ireland and do it. And my only concern is fund houses tend to repeat what they've already done. So if you've already got a set of funds in Luxembourg that can do exactly the same, and you've been doing it for a number of years, why would you change? You've also got to think who our investors are, their pension schemes. the big investors, pension schemes, life companies, they tend to be pretty prudent in the structures they invest in. And what I mean by that is they like tried and tested. So if you go to them with a new shiny vehicle, you may not be successful. And it's very difficult. And we've had different vehicles over the time, haven't we? Things like the ACS, authorised contractual scheme, have they really taken off? We've got now set up, we're using one, and I know a few other life companies are, but they're not, they haven't really taken off. And we've seen that over the time. But I do think it's an uphill battle to get people to change what's already working.
So I agree with you. And in the past, there hasn't been, as you say, a compelling reason to move away from the existing platforms and pathways. But do you think, sort of like in a post-Brexit environment, where the Europeans are pushing ahead with the likes of, say, for example, DAC 6 and 883 and so on, that would help UK's fund management industry?
I certainly think it will do. I certainly think, without a shadow of a doubt, ATAD 3, is going to, again, for us, ATAD 3 is not a problem per se, but what we will find is that our large investors, they may probably have a checklist, and they will say, have you got any shell companies in your structure? If so, we don't want to invest. And it's things like that. It's the perception that will cause you problems in the long run with things like that. But I do think we've got an opportunity. The UK has an opportunity, and in certain areas, things like VAT, they've got a big opportunity to change things and to make the UK the place to locate your funds. And whether they do that or not, of course, could come down to, let's be honest, they haven't got deep pockets. They won't want to give away much. We know that. So they've got to be careful, but we also need to be competitive.
Absolutely. You mentioned VAT there. I guess an element of tax that, if anything, has sort of been changing from a technology point of view at the rate of light, right? All this around automation and making tax digital and everything that associates with that. How has the tax landscape changed with the introduction of technology for you?
It has changed without a shadow of a doubt. VAT, making tax digital was first brought in for VAT. It's now being brought in for corporation tax returns. And you have to move with technology. There is no question you have to move. I also think tax departments are having to change because, as I mentioned earlier, HMRC have changed. When I speak to HMRC, which I do on a regular basis, they will say to me that they no longer do their old-fashioned tax audits like they used to. They want to look at our systems. They want to know which systems we're using, and they do their audits on a risk-based approach. So having people in your tax department that, dare I say, ticking and bashing numbers is not what HMRC are interested in. What HMRC are interested in is technology, and they will look at where they see are the riskier areas. So have you got the right systems in place? How are you doing your, if you take VAT, partial exemption's complex. So it's difficult to get a system to do partial exemption, but that's what they will want to see. They don't want people doing manual calculations. You can't do that anymore. And you're not, as I say, you're not going to get those old-fashioned audits anymore. It's more, systems questionnaires. What are your capabilities? What systems are you using? What links do you have so that it's straight through processing? So that means I've got to recruit slightly different people, if I'm honest. You've got to have people that are very, technically minded, because that's what you're going to need. as well as you've still got to have those tax skills, of course. So I'm not, dumbing down on people who know legislation, but you need the technology to get, so that you can produce your returns. We think of, what's coming down the line with Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is all around consolidation and getting, your profits and your tax that you're paying. You're going to have to, you can't manually do that. It's got to be system developed. So you need tax technology without a shadow of a doubt.
Absolutely. And I think, kind of recapping that conversation, it's a lot around how that evolution has happened over the years and, this thing around tax transparency and fair tax and that development has happened over the course, I'm sure, of the entirety of your career leading to this point now. Looking into the future, what does the future hold in your opinion from a tax perspective?
I do think tax departments and tax teams will have to change. There's no doubt to my mind that, I've got a large tax team, as you say, one of the largest ones in the industry. You cannot just keep on recruiting people because eventually businesses will say, hold on a minute, you can't just keep on recruiting tax people. You need to work more efficiently, and that is with technology. I still come back to the point as well. It's about a risk-based approach. So that's where things will change. You've got to focus on getting the big things right. And if we miss a tax return that gives us £100 fine, well, that happens. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that, but you've got to get the big things right. And that's going to be, without a shadow of a doubt, it's tax technology. It's making sure you can deliver quickly your results and your tax numbers. And it's good, and you've got to look at that risk-based approach. I really do believe tax teams have got to, I used to use a phrase, do more with less. They've got to do more, but they've got to do it with less resource. So if you've got less resource, you've got to use technology to bridge the gap.
Great.
So, Malcolm, there's a friend of mine, Richard Susskind, who's written a book called The Future of the Professions. And he essentially basically says that people like you and me are a dying breed, and future won't have any space for us because it's going to be AI, artificial intelligence, who will be doing all of this. And particularly in, say, for example, when you can have robo investors, so you've got robots basically making investment decisions in the asset management house. Do you think asset management industry is going to have tax advisors in the future?
I personally do, because at the end of the day, I still think people want that interaction and that human, dare I say, touch. I also think that it's especially in something like tax and fund structuring, no two models are the same. And that's all very well having, as you say, AI, that you can, the system says this is the answer sort of thing. I don't think you can do that for certain things, I agree with, but I still think there's a role for both, let's be honest. You've got to have that human interaction. You've got to have that, dare I say, gut feeling. Does this look right? Does this smell right? Sort of thing. Should we be doing this? I still think there's a demand for that, as well as having, if you've got systems that can help, analyze spreadsheets and, dare I say, things like disallowables, capital, especially capital allowances. Yes, artificial intelligence. We've got a couple of robots that we use that do quite a lot of our VAT returns. So they take all the systems, they take all the invoices, they go into the ledger, they produce the VAT return, they do all the checks and balances. We've developed robots to do that, but that works if you've got a set defined process. You still need someone to look at the output. Does this look right? Are we sure it's right, sort of thing?
Okay, so I'm good for the next 10 years.
Don't worry, guys.
I think the specializations are difficult to replicate. And as you say, the higher level judgments, they're difficult to code in because that's really about experience. So, Ektaa, we're going to have to watch that space and stay in touch with you.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head around the technology piece. I mean, absolutely, it is a part of the way that DNA and tax teams are evolving. But what doesn't sort of obviously replicate anything is the human interaction element, right? The interpretation, the analysis, and the kind of interpretation from a wider business stance point. So I think while technology is absolutely, key for automated processes and things like the VAT side, etc., what we haven't necessarily seen as of yet, and don't be speaking too early because who knows where my job might be outsourced to a bunch of robots in about 10 years time. But I think that the main part of it is still having, that level of surface interaction and people being able to have the human expertise, I guess, around the interpretation of what the automation produces in this next phase.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That was an interesting set of discussions. But before I move on to the rapid fire round, I just wanted to recap what we have covered today. So after introducing you, Malcolm, we discussed a little bit about your background and how, your work pattern is changing, particularly sort of like the in-house role. But then we went on to discuss a little bit about, what are the pertinent tax issues, particularly for the asset management industry. And we rounded it off by a discussion around some future developments. Okay. So with that, Ektaa, I think we're ready for the next round.
Absolutely, we are, Malcolm. My favorite bit of the podcast. Now we get to know you as a person in a bit more detail. Are you ready for what we call the rapid fire round?
I'm not so sure I'm ready, but go ahead.
It's world famous now, Malcolm. Don't worry about it. We're going to give you a series of questions to kick off, and you've got to choose your preference. Are you ready?
Okay.
Cool. Well, let's start with an easy one. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Man City or Man United?
I would say neither, to be honest. But if I had to pick, I would say Manchester United.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Next holiday destination?
Turkey.
Favorite actor?
Or Piers Brosnan.
Favorite movie?
No, Good Time to Die.
That's a good one. Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks?
Tom Cruise.
Big Mac or a Whopper?
Big Mac.
If you're on death row, Malcolm, what would your last meal be?
It would be a Indian.
Ooh, left field. And lastly, Malcolm, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Nice. You survived it. Good effort.
So, Malcolm, what have you been spending your time on lately, outside of work, of course?
To be honest, yeah, I play a lot of golf, Ali. So I do. I'm quite a big golfer, so that's my way of relaxing. If I'm honest, I manage to get out once or twice a week, mainly at weekends, sometime on a Friday afternoon. But yeah, I do play a lot of golf, and I enjoy it. I wouldn't say I'm a great golfer, but I enjoy it, and I enjoy the company. It's given me a lot of, as I said at the start, we've had a lot of good friends in this industry, and some of them play golf, so it's quite nice to get out with some colleagues and go and have a game of golf. And we've all got the same issues, so when it comes to work, so it's good sometimes to relax and play golf, fresh air, great countryside. Yeah.
Therapy on the golf course.
Are you going to share with us your handicap?
I'm off 18 at the moment. It's the lowest I got to was 14.4. So I've been down to 14. I'm now off 18, but I actually just play golf to enjoy it. If I'm honest, I don't let it. Dare I say, I don't let it beat me up.
Sure, sure. No, I completely understand. So, in terms of your extracurricular activities, is there a book that you've recently been reading that's really sparked your imagination, that's had a impact on you?
The books I read tend to be I read quite a few Peter James books. So I read his books that are all based down in Brighton. They're thrillers, crimes. I read those. I also read quite a few books, dare I say, on the Second World War, and again leading up to the Second World War in 1930s Germany. And it's quite a sobering thought, really, that mankind can do things that you couldn't imagine that they could do. And are we seeing it now? Possibly. I don't know, but it does keep you pretty grounded, if I'm honest, when you read
Yeah,
back about. I think it's important to know about history
of
and
course.
what's going on. So I tend to, for my sort of escapism, I read, crime and thrillers and things like that. But for a bit of reality, I go back into history, and I do find that quite fascinating.
What's
So,
that
Ekta,
famous? Oh, after you.
no, I was going to say, Ekta, I think we're picking up a pattern here. This is our third guest who basically is into crime fiction.
I know exactly crime and war, well, war history and history books. I mean, what I was going to say, what is that famous quote? You don't know where you're going until you know where you've come from, right? And I think history is so important to read. Fun fact for you, Malcolm, about Peter James. Did you know that he was the former glove maker to the Queen, just in honor of Jubilee weekend?
No, I didn't.
There we go. Learn something new every day on this podcast, guys. Well, look, Malcolm, you have been an inspiration for me and a career mentor for me for over 12 years now. What piece of information or advice would you like to leave our audience with?
I come back to the point about always be true to yourself. Always treat people how you want to be treated. You never know what's round the corner, and you never know what's going to happen in this world. So I just think you should always treat people with respect, and I don't think you will go far wrong if you do that. But you should be true to yourself. Always be true to yourself.
That's a great message.
Look, it's been a pleasure having you. And Malcolm is one of those industry doyens who is exactly that, a real gentleman. And it's been a pleasure knowing you.
Likewise, Ali. It's been a pleasure knowing you over the years.
Well, listeners, thank you for listening to the Tax Files. It's been a pleasure having you join us. Please subscribe and get in contact if you wish to discuss any of these topics with us and our team, or if you have any questions at all. We will catch you here again at the same time next month with a most esteemed guest. To stay up to date with announcements, updates, and guest reveals, please follow Hansuki on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you soon again.